I was sitting at my kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in Gilbert, Arizona, eating a bowl of cereal and checking my phone when I heard the unmistakable crunch of metal against metal coming from outside. That sound, the one every car owner dreads, sent my stomach dropping straight through the floor. I jumped up so fast, my chair tipped backward, spilling milk across the table as I sprinted toward my front door. The sight that greeted me made my blood boil instantly. A pristine white Lexus SUV was currently embedded in the rear driver's side of my Honda Accord, which I had parked perfectly legal on the street in front of my house. Steam was rising from somewhere under the Lexus's hood, and my poor car's bumper was completely destroyed. The taillights shattered into 1,000 red plastic pieces scattered across the asphalt. Behind the wheel of the Lexus sat Patricia Edmonds, the vice president of our Sagebrush Hills HOA, and quite possibly the most insufferable woman I had ever encountered in my 32 years of existence. She was already climbing out of her vehicle, her phone pressed to her ear, her face twisted in that particular expression of righteous indignation that I had come to recognize all too well over the past year of living in this neighborhood. I rushed down my driveway in my bare feet, my heart pounding. "What the hell happened? You just crashed into my car." Patricia held up one perfectly manicured finger, silencing me while she continued her phone conversation. "Yes, officer, I need to report a traffic hazard. Someone has parked their vehicle illegally near a blind corner and I've had an accident as a result." She paused, looking directly at me with cold eyes. "The owner is becoming aggressive." "Aggressive? Are you kidding me right now?" I looked at the scene again, trying to process what was happening. My car was parked at least 30 feet from the corner, well within legal limits. I had been extra careful about that because I knew how particular our HOA was about every tiny rule. "Yes, that's correct," Patricia continued into her phone, turning away from me. "174 Seguero Drive. Please send someone immediately." I pulled out my own phone and started taking pictures. The damage was extensive. My rear quarter panel was completely crushed, the bumper hanging off, and there appeared to be fluid leaking from somewhere underneath. Patricia's Lexus had a crumpled front end, the hood buckled upward, and the right headlight was completely destroyed. "You need to give me your insurance information," I said, trying to keep my voice level despite the rage building in my chest. "You just crashed into my parked car." Patricia finally ended her call and turned to face me fully. She was wearing a cream-colored pantsuit despite it being barely 8 in the morning, her blonde hair sprayed into an immovable helmet, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Your vehicle was parked illegally. According to HOA Guidelines Section 14, Paragraph 3, no vehicle may be parked within 50 feet of a corner intersection." "That's not even a real law," I shot back. "And even if it were an HOA rule, which I've never seen in any documentation, my car is nowhere near 50 feet from the corner. Look at it. It's barely past my driveway. I have measurements," she said crisply, pulling her phone back out and beginning to tap at the screen. "I've been documenting violations in this neighborhood for the past 3 months. Your vehicle has been flagged multiple times for various infractions." "What infractions?" "I park on the street because my garage is full of boxes for moving in. There's nothing illegal about that." A small crowd was beginning to gather. My neighbor to the right, an elderly man named Robert Zander, came walking over with his cane. "I saw the whole thing," he said loudly. "You were driving way too fast, Patricia. Ryan's car was parked perfectly fine." I had never been so grateful for Robert's presence. He had lived in this neighborhood for 20 years, long before it had been taken over by the current HOA board, and he had no patience for their constant overreach. Patricia's face flushed slightly, but her expression remained firm. I was driving the posted speed limit. The problem is that Ryan's vehicle created a blind spot that made it impossible to navigate safely. The blind spot is on the corner, Robert pointed with his cane. His car is in the middle of the block. You weren't even coming around the corner. You were just driving down the street and ran straight into the back of his car. The sun was in my eyes, Patricia said, her story already shifting. The sun rises in the east, I said, pointing. You were driving north. Try again. A Gilbert Police Department cruiser pulled up before Patricia could respond. A young officer stepped out, looking tired and already resigned to dealing with what was clearly going to be a tedious situation. His nameplate read Officer Martinez. Someone called about an accident. He asked, looking between the two damaged vehicles. Yes, officer. Patricia jumped in immediately, stepping forward. I'm Patricia Edmonds, Vice President of the Sagebrush Hills HOA. I was driving down the street when this illegally parked vehicle caused me to have an accident. Officer Martinez walked over to my Honda, examining the damage, then looked at where it was positioned on the street. He pulled out a measuring tape from his vehicle and walked to the corner, measuring the distance. When he came back, he was writing notes on a pad. The vehicle is parked approximately 28 feet from the corner, he said. That's well within legal limits. Arizona law requires 15 feet clearance from an intersection. But our HOA rules state 50 feet, Patricia insisted. HOA rules don't supersede state traffic laws, madam, Officer Martinez said patiently. And even if they did, this wouldn't be a traffic violation. It would be a civil matter between you and the HOA. He turned to me. Is this your vehicle, sir? Yes, that's my car, I said. I'm Ryan Zander. I live right here. I parked it last night around 7 and haven't moved it since. I was inside having breakfast when I heard the crash. Can anyone verify that the car was parked and unoccupied at the time of the collision? I can, Robert spoke up again. I was sitting on my porch. Patricia came flying down the street, looking at her phone, and plowed right into the back of Ryan's car, never even hit the brakes until after impact. Patricia's face went from red to white. That's not true. I was not on my phone. Madam, I'm going to need to see your license and insurance information, Officer Martinez said, his tone becoming more official. Both of you, actually. I ran back inside to grab my wallet and insurance card, my hands shaking with adrenaline. When I returned, Patricia was arguing with the officer about the finer points of HOA authority, which he was clearly not interested in hearing. After examining both our documents and taking more photos of the scene, Officer Martinez pulled out his citation book. Mrs. Edmonds, I'm citing you for following too closely and failure to maintain control of your vehicle. The evidence clearly shows your vehicle struck Mr. Zander's parked car from behind. This is ridiculous, Patricia sputtered. I demand to speak to your supervisor. You're welcome to file a complaint, Officer Martinez said calmly, handing her the citation. But the physical evidence doesn't lie. Your vehicle struck his parked vehicle. You're at fault. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. At least the police report would show the truth. What do I need to do now? I asked. Exchange insurance information, get your vehicle repaired, and file a claim with her insurance company, Officer Martinez said. I'd recommend getting an estimate as soon as possible. That damage looks pretty extensive. Patricia thrust her insurance card at me like it personally offended her. This isn't over, she said quietly. You'll be hearing from the HOA board. Looking forward to it, I said, snapping a photo of her insurance card with my phone before handing it back. The officer finished his report and left, followed shortly by Patricia, who had to call a tow truck for her Lexus since it was leaking coolant all over the street. I called my own tow service and then my insurance company to start the claim process. Robert stayed with me, shaking his head. "That woman has been nothing but trouble since she got elected to that board," he said. "She's been trying to fine me for having my trash cans visible from the street, even though my driveway is 50 feet long and you'd need binoculars to see them." "She's unbelievable," I agreed, watching as my poor Honda was loaded onto a flatbed truck. "I just moved here 10 months ago. I thought HOAs were supposed to maintain property values and handle landscaping, not make everyone's lives miserable." "Used to be that way," Robert said. "Then Patricia and her friends got elected 3 years ago, and it's been downhill ever since. They've tripled the annual fees, implemented dozens of new rules, and spend most of their time driving around looking for violations to fine people for. That's insane." "You should come to the next board meeting," Robert suggested. "It's next Thursday at 7. They usually spend the whole time congratulating themselves and ignoring homeowner complaints, but there's a growing group of us who are trying to get them voted out." I promised I would think about it, though at that moment, all I wanted to do was deal with getting my car fixed. The tow truck driver told me he could take it directly to a collision repair shop that his company worked with, so I had him drop it off at Gilbert Auto Body on Baseline Road. The rest of the day was consumed with phone calls. My insurance company confirmed that since I had been parked legally and hit from behind, I would not be at fault. However, I still had to pay my $500 deductible and wait for Patricia's insurance company to accept liability before I could get reimbursed. The collision shop estimated the repairs would take at least 2 weeks and cost around $7,000. I had just finished my last call with a rental car company when my phone rang again. Unknown number, local area code. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Is this Ryan Zander?" A woman's voice, sharp and officious. "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Deborah Carlson, president of the Sagebrush Hills HOA. I'm calling to inform you that you're being fined $500 for parking violations and creating a safety hazard that resulted in property damage to another homeowner's vehicle." I actually laughed out loud. "You cannot be serious." "I'm completely serious, Mr. Zander. We have photographic evidence of your vehicle parked in violation of community guidelines. The fine notice will be mailed to your address, and payment is expected within 30 days. "Your vice president crashed into my legally parked car," I said, my voice rising. "The police officer confirmed my car was parked legally. He cited her for the accident. You can't fine me for being the victim of someone else's bad driving." "The HOA guidelines are separate from municipal traffic laws," Deborah said in a tone that suggested she had given this speech many times before. "You agreed to abide by our rules when you purchased your property. I suggest you review your community handbook." "I've read the handbook cover to cover," I said, which was true. I had spent an entire evening going through it when I first moved in, shocked by how many ridiculous rules there were. There's nothing in there about 50 feet from corners. The parking section says vehicles must be parked in designated areas and not block sidewalks or driveways. The handbook is updated regularly. A revised version was distributed 3 months ago. I never received a revised version. It was posted on the community website and emailed to all homeowners. I never got an email. I pulled up my laptop and checked my email, searching for anything from the HOA. The last email I had received from them was 6 months ago, reminding everyone about pool hours. "That's not our responsibility if you don't keep your contact information current," Deborah said dismissively. "The fine stands. Failure to pay will result in additional penalties and potential legal action. Have a good day, Mr. Zander." She hung up before I could respond. I sat there staring at my phone, absolutely furious. This was beyond unreasonable. This was targeted harassment. I called Robert immediately and told him what had just happened. He wasn't surprised. "They do this all the time," he said. "They find some obscure rule or make up a new one, claim they distributed it, and then fine people when they don't comply. Last year they tried to fine me for having a vegetable garden in my backyard because they said it violated the aesthetic standards of the community. My backyard. That's completely fenced and not visible from the street. What did you do?" I told them to pound sand. "They threatened to put a lien on my house, but my lawyer sent them a letter and they backed off. Cost me $1,000 in legal fees, though. This is insane." "Come to the meeting Thursday," Robert said again. "You need to see what we're dealing with, and bring any documentation you have from today. The police report, the insurance information, photos, everything." I agreed, then spent the rest of the afternoon documenting everything that had happened. I wrote down a detailed timeline, printed out all my photos, and made copies of the police report that Officer Martinez had given me. I also went onto the HOA website to look for this supposed updated handbook. The website was a disaster. It looked like it had been designed in 1995 and never updated. The navigation was confusing, half the links were broken, and the documents section was completely empty except for a PDF labeled Pool Rules 2019. There was no updated handbook, no recent announcements, nothing. I took screenshots of everything, including the empty documents page and the date stamp showing when I had accessed it. The fine notice arrived in my mailbox 2 days later, just as promised. It was printed on official HOA letterhead and detailed my violations in bureaucratic language. According to the notice, I had violated Section 14.3.7 of the Community Guidelines by parking within 50 feet of an intersection, and Section 22.1.4 by creating a hazardous condition that resulted in property damage. The total fine was $500, due within 30 days, with a note at the bottom stating that failure to pay would result in an additional $100 late fee per month and potential legal action, including property liens. I took photos of the notice and added it to my growing folder of documentation. The rental car company dropped off a compact sedan that afternoon, which my insurance would cover for up to 30 days. It was a downgrade from my Accord, but at least I could get to work. I was a software developer for a company based in Phoenix, but I worked from home most days, so transportation wasn't urgent. Over the next few days, I did some research into HOA laws in Arizona. What I found was both enlightening and disturbing. HOAs in Arizona had significant power, including the ability to fine homeowners and place liens on properties for unpaid fines. However, they also had to follow certain rules. They were required to provide proper notice of rule changes, hold regular meetings, allow homeowners to attend and speak at those meetings, and maintain accurate records. From what I could tell, the Sagebrush Hills HOA was violating several of these requirements. The supposed handbook update had never been properly distributed. The website was non-functional, and from what Robert had told me, homeowner concerns were routinely ignored at meetings. I also discovered that Arizona law required HOA board members to act in the best interest of the community, and prohibited them from using their position for personal benefit or retaliation. The fact that Patricia had crashed into my car and then immediately called the police to falsely claim I was parked illegally, followed by the HOA president calling to fine me, Seemed like a pretty clear case of retaliation. I started compiling a list of questions to ask at the Thursday meeting, along with copies of all my documentation. I also printed out the relevant sections of Arizona HOA law that I thought they might be violating. Thursday evening arrived, and I walked over to the community center where the meeting was being held. It was a small building near the neighborhood pool, with a meeting room that could hold maybe 50 people. When I arrived at 6:45, there were already about 30 homeowners sitting in folding chairs facing a long table at the front of the room. Robert waved me over to a seat he had saved. "Good turnout tonight," he said quietly. "Word got around about what happened to you. People are angry." I looked around and recognized a few faces from around the neighborhood, though I hadn't met most of these people formally. They were all talking in low voices, and the general mood seemed tense. At exactly 7 o'clock, 4 people filed in through a side door and took seats at the table. Patricia Edmonds was there, her arm in a sling that I strongly suspected was for dramatic effect, since I had seen her moving it freely during the accident. Next to her was Deborah Carlson, a severe-looking woman in her 50s with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. The other 2 board members were a man named Gerald Thompson, the treasurer, and a younger woman named Susan Martinez, the secretary. Deborah called the meeting to order and immediately launched into reading the minutes from the previous meeting, which were incredibly boring and mostly consisted of them congratulating themselves for various beautification projects. Then Gerald gave a financial report that revealed the HOA currently had over $200,000 in reserves, which seemed excessive for a neighborhood of only 75 homes. When they got to new business, Deborah announced that they would be implementing several new fines for various violations, including a $50 fine for leaving trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours after collection day, and a $100 fine for having window coverings that weren't white or beige when viewed from outside. "Excuse me," an older woman in the front row raised her hand. "I have blue curtains in my bedroom. Are you saying I have to replace them?" "The rule applies to coverings visible from the street or common areas," Deborah said without looking up from her papers. "If your bedroom faces the street, then yes." A murmur of discontent rippled through the room. "That's ridiculous," someone called out. "You can't dictate what color curtains we have inside our own homes." "The rules are designed to maintain property values and aesthetic continuity," Patricia spoke up, her voice dripping with condescension. "If you don't like it, perhaps you should have purchased a home outside of an HOA community." "I've lived here for 18 years, the woman with the blue curtain said, her voice shaking with anger. "There were no rules like this when I moved in. You can't just keep adding new restrictions." "The board has the authority to implement rules as needed for the benefit of the community," Deborah said firmly. "Now, moving on to violation reports." "Wait a minute," Robert stood up, his cane tapping on the floor. "You can't just ignore homeowner concerns like that." "We have a right to discuss these new rules." "There will be time for general comments at the end of the meeting," Susan said, reading from a script. "Please hold your questions until then." "This is nonsense," Robert said, but he sat back down. The violation reports took nearly 20 minutes. Deborah read through a list of fines that had been issued over the past month, including fines for grass being a quarter-inch too long, mailboxes not being repainted quickly enough, basketball hoops visible from the street, and holiday decorations left up past the designated removal date. The total amount of fines issued was over $8,000. When she got to my name, she paused for effect. "Ryan Zander, 174 Seguero Drive, $500 for parking violations resulting in property damage to another homeowner." "That's a lie," I said loudly, standing up. Patricia crashed into my legally parked car. The police report confirms that. Mr. Zander, please wait for the comment period, Deborah said. No, I said firmly. You just publicly accused me of causing property damage. I have a right to defend myself. My car was parked legally. A Gilbert police officer measured the distance from the corner and confirmed it was within state law. Officer Martinez cited Patricia for following too closely and failure to maintain control of her vehicle. She's at fault, not me. Patricia stood up, cradling her sling-adorned arm. I suffered injuries because of your reckless parking. You created a blind corner that made it impossible for me to see. You were driving straight down the middle of the street and hit my parked car from behind, I said, pulling out my phone and bringing up the photos. There was no corner involved, and according to a witness, you were looking at your phone when you crashed. That's defamatory, Patricia gasped. It's witness testimony, Robert called out. I was there. I told the police the same thing. The room erupted in conversation, multiple people talking at once. Deborah banged a gavel on the table. Order, we will have order. This is exactly the kind of corruption we're talking about. Another homeowner stood up, a middle-aged man I didn't recognize. The vice president causes an accident through her own negligence and then uses her position to fine the victim. That's abuse of power. How dare you, Patricia said, her face flushing red. I have served this community faithfully for 3 years. You've turned this community into a police state, someone else shouted. The meeting devolved into chaos. Multiple homeowners were on their feet, shouting complaints about fines and rules and the board's behavior. Deborah kept banging her gavel, but no one was paying attention anymore. Finally, Gerald stood up and held up his hands. Everyone, please. We can't have a productive meeting like this. Let's take a 10-minute recess and then come back and discuss these concerns in an orderly fashion. The board members filed out through their side door and the room exploded in conversation. Robert turned to me and grinned. Well, you certainly stirred things up. I'm not paying that fine, I said. This is harassment. A woman approached me, extending her hand. Hi, I'm Jennifer. I live over on Mesquite Street. I'm an attorney, and I specialize in real estate law, including HOA disputes. Can I see your documentation? I pulled out my folder and showed her everything I had compiled. She looked through it carefully, her expression growing more serious as she read. This is a pretty clear-cut case of board misconduct, she said. You have the police report showing she was at fault, witness testimony, and photographic evidence. The fine they're trying to issue has no legal basis. The parking rule they're citing doesn't appear in the official handbook, and they can't prove it was properly distributed to all homeowners. Can they really put a lien on my house if I don't pay? They can try, but based on this documentation, I don't think it would hold up in court. However, fighting it would require you to either sue the HOA or wait for them to sue you for the unpaid fine. Either way, it's going to cost money and time. What do you recommend? Jennifer thought for a moment. Honestly, I think there are grounds here for a bigger case against the board. If they're retaliating against you for being involved in an accident with one of their members, that's a serious violation of their fiduciary duty. And based on what I'm hearing tonight, you're not the only one being targeted with questionable fines. Are you offering to take the case? I'm considering it. Let me talk to some of the other homeowners first. If we can establish a pattern of misconduct, we might be able to force the entire board to resign and get a court-appointed administrator until new elections can be held. Before I could respond, the board members returned and Deborah called everyone back to order. This time, people sat down, but the tension in the room was palpable. We've discussed the concerns raised before the recess, Deborah said stiffly. The board stands by its decisions regarding fines and rule enforcement. However, in the interest of community harmony, we're willing to consider appeals on a case-by-case basis. Any homeowner who wishes to appeal a fine can submit a written request to the board, and we'll review it at next month's meeting. That's not good enough, Jennifer stood up. The board needs to address the specific allegations that have been raised tonight. Mr. Zander has documentation showing that the fine issued to him has no basis in fact or in your own rules. Patricia Edmonds was cited by police for causing an accident, yet you're attempting to fine the victim. That's retaliation, and it's a violation of your fiduciary duty to the homeowners. And who are you? Patricia demanded. Jennifer Morrison, attorney at law. I live at 847 Mesquite Street and I'm a homeowner in this community, which means I have every right to speak at this meeting. Deborah and Patricia exchanged glances. Miss Morrison, we appreciate your input, but the board's decisions are final unless successfully appealed through the proper channels. The proper channels include the Arizona court system, Jennifer said calmly. And I'm prepared to file suit on behalf of Mr. Zander and any other homeowners who have been subjected to retaliatory or baseless fines if this matter isn't resolved tonight. The room went silent. The board members were clearly not expecting this level of pushback. Gerald cleared his throat. Perhaps we should table the discussion of Mr. Zander's fine until we can review the police report and other documentation. Perhaps you should dismiss it entirely, Jennifer said, along with apologizing for the attempted retaliation. We are not going to apologize for enforcing community rules, Patricia said sharply. Then we'll see you in court, Jennifer replied, sitting back down. The rest of the meeting was tense but relatively uneventful. Several other homeowners stood up to complain about various fines and rules, and the board stonewalled every single one of them. By the time the meeting ended at 9:30, I counted at least 15 homeowners who had approached Jennifer to discuss potential legal action. We gathered in the parking lot after the meeting, a group of about 20 people, all sharing stories of unreasonable fines and harassment by the board. One couple had been fined $300 because their fence was 6 inches taller than the maximum allowable height, even though it had been installed before they bought the house and had been there for over a decade. Another homeowner had been fined for having a pickup truck parked in his driveway because the board decided pickup trucks were commercial vehicles and therefore not allowed in residential driveways, even though he used it for personal transportation. The stories went on, each one more ridiculous than the last. Jennifer collected contact information from everyone and promised to review the HOA's governing documents and recent actions to build a case. I think we have grounds for a class action suit, she said. But I need to do more research first. In the meantime, I'd encourage everyone to document everything. Take photos, keep all correspondence, record the dates and times of any interactions with board members. The more evidence we have, the stronger our case will be. I drove home that night feeling both angry and hopeful. Angry that I had somehow ended up in the middle of this mess just because I wanted to buy a nice house in a quiet neighborhood. Hopeful that maybe, finally, someone was going to hold this corrupt board accountable. The next morning, I received an email from Patricia's insurance company. They had reviewed the police report and were accepting full liability for the accident. They would be contacting the collision shop directly to arrange payment for my repairs, and I would be reimbursed for my deductible within 2 weeks. It was the first good news I had gotten all week. I immediately forwarded the email to Jennifer, along with a note thanking her for her help at the meeting. She replied within an hour, saying she had already started drafting a demand letter to the HOA board requiring them to rescind my fine and cease all retaliatory actions. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA. Inside was a revised fine notice, now claiming I owed $750. They had added a $250 administrative fee for disputing the original fine, plus another $100 for legal consultation fees, because I had threatened litigation at the board meeting. I photographed the letter and sent it to Jennifer immediately. Her response was brief. Perfect. They just handed us everything we need. She filed the lawsuit the following week. It was a class action complaint on behalf of myself and 14 other homeowners, alleging that the Sagebrush Hills HOA board had engaged in a pattern of misconduct, including improper rule-making procedures, retaliatory fines, failure to maintain proper records, and breach of fiduciary duty. The complaint sought to have all disputed fines dismissed, recover legal fees, and force new elections for the entire board. The board's response was to double down. They sent out a mass email to all homeowners claiming that a small group of malcontents was trying to destroy the community, and that all homeowners should support the board's efforts to maintain property values. They also scheduled a special meeting to vote on a special assessment that would fund legal defense against our lawsuit. That special meeting turned into a disaster for the board. Over 60 homeowners showed up, many of whom had not been involved in the original complaint, but were outraged by the board's behavior. When Deborah tried to call for a vote on the special assessment, Robert stood up and called for a motion to remove the entire board from office through a recall vote. According to the HOA bylaws, a recall vote could be triggered if 20% of homeowners signed a petition. With 75 homes in the community, that meant we needed 15 signatures. Robert had brought a petition with him, and by the end of the meeting, 42 homeowners had signed it. The board tried to claim the petition was invalid because it hadn't been submitted through proper channels first, but Jennifer stood up and read directly from the bylaws, which had no such requirement. The recall vote had to be held within 30 days. Over the next month, the neighborhood turned into a war zone. The board sent out daily emails attacking those of us who had signed the petition, calling us names and claiming we were trying to destroy property values. Patricia personally went door to door trying to convince people to vote against the recall, apparently having made a miraculous recovery from her injuries. Meanwhile, our group organized our own campaign. We created a website documenting all the board's misconduct, including copies of improper fines, the non-functional HOA website, and testimonials from homeowners who had been harassed. We distributed flyers explaining why the recall was necessary and what we hoped to accomplish with new leadership. The collision shop called to let me know my car was ready 2 weeks before the recall vote. The repairs had been completed perfectly, and Patricia's insurance had covered everything. When I picked up my Honda, it looked better than it had before the accident. The body shop manager mentioned that Patricia had called 3 times trying to get them to say the damage was somehow my fault, but they had refused to change their assessment. The recall vote was held on a Saturday afternoon in early March. The community center was packed, with almost every homeowner in attendance. According to the bylaws, a simple majority was needed to remove each board member. The vote was conducted by secret ballot, with Jennifer and 2 other neutral homeowners serving as vote counters. The results weren't even close. Deborah was voted out 68-7. Patricia lost 65-10. Gerald went down 63-12. Only Susan, the secretary who had barely spoken at any of the meetings, survived the recall with a split vote of 38 to 37. The moment the results were announced, Patricia stood up and pointed directly at me. "This is your fault," she shouted. "You've destroyed this community because you couldn't accept responsibility for your own mistakes. You crashed into my parked car and then tried to extort me," I said calmly. "All I did was tell the truth." "You'll regret this," Patricia said, grabbing her purse and storming toward the exit. "All of you will regret this when property values collapse because there's no one maintaining standards." "I think we'll manage," Robert called after her. With the old board removed, the bylaws required a new election within 60 days. In the meantime, Susan remained as acting secretary, and Jennifer volunteered to serve as temporary administrator to keep the HOA functioning. Her first action was to rescind all the disputed fines, including mine. Her second action was to hire a professional management company to take over the day-to-day operations and bring the HOA's records and website into the 21st century. I decided to run for a position on the new board, along with Robert and several other homeowners who had been active in the recall effort. We ran on a platform of transparency, reasonable rule enforcement, and treating homeowners like adults rather than children. The election was held in April, and our entire slate won. Robert became president, I became vice president, and 3 other reform-minded homeowners filled the remaining positions. Susan chose not to run for re-election, saying she was tired of the drama. Our first board meeting was nothing like the meetings under the old regime. We opened by inviting all homeowners to attend and participate. We committed to posting all minutes and financial reports on the newly redesigned website within 48 hours of every meeting. We reviewed every rule in the handbook and eliminated dozens of ridiculous restrictions, including the ones about window covering colors, pickup trucks in driveways, and backyard gardens. We also established clear procedures for how new rules could be proposed and implemented, requiring homeowner input and a vote before anything became official. And we set up an appeals process for any fines that was actually fair and transparent, rather than just rubber stamping the board's decisions. The changes weren't universally popular. A few homeowners, apparently friends of the old board, complained that we were letting standards slip. But the overwhelming majority of residents were thrilled with the new direction. About 2 months after the new board took over, I was outside washing my car when a process server approached me. I had a moment of panic, thinking maybe the old board was trying to sue me personally, but it turned out to be something else entirely. Patricia was being charged with insurance fraud. According to the documents, Patricia had filed a personal injury claim with her insurance company, claiming she had suffered severe injuries in the accident, including whiplash, back pain, and emotional trauma. She was seeking $50,000 in damages. However, her insurance company had conducted an investigation and discovered multiple pieces of evidence that contradicted her claims. First, there were photos of Patricia playing tennis at a country club 2 days after the accident, despite claiming she couldn't lift her arm. Second, there were surveillance videos from the board meetings showing her moving freely without any apparent pain or limitation. And third, there was witness testimony from Robert and others that she had been fine immediately after the accident and only claimed injuries later. The insurance company had referred the case to the Arizona Department of Insurance Fraud Division, and they had opened a criminal investigation. I was being subpoenaed as a witness because I had been present at the scene of the accident. I called Jennifer immediately to ask what this meant. She was delighted by the news. "Insurance fraud is a serious crime in Arizona," she explained. If they can prove she deliberately exaggerated or fabricated injuries to collect insurance money, she could face felony charges. And if she's convicted, she could be looking at jail time and having to pay restitution. The investigation took several months. I had to give a deposition where I described exactly what had happened the morning of the accident, including Patricia's immediate behavior and the fact that she had been moving normally and hadn't mentioned any injuries to the police officer. Robert gave similar testimony, as did Officer Martinez. In August, Patricia was formally charged with 1 count of insurance fraud, a Class 4 felony. The case alleged that she had knowingly made false statements to her insurance company in order to collect money for injuries she hadn't actually sustained. The trial was held in October at the Maricopa County Superior Court in downtown Phoenix. I had to take a day off work to testify, which was nerve-wracking but also somewhat satisfying. I told the truth about what had happened, presented my photos and documentation, and answered questions from both the prosecutor and Patricia's defense attorney. The defense tried to argue that Patricia had genuinely believed she was injured and that symptoms had developed over time. But the prosecution presented medical records showing she had never sought treatment for any of the claimed injuries, plus the photos and videos of her playing tennis, carrying heavy boxes of HOA materials, and generally moving around without any difficulty. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict. Patricia was sentenced in November. The judge gave her 2 years of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered her to pay restitution to the insurance company in the amount of $12,000, which covered their investigation costs and legal fees. She was also permanently barred from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. I didn't attend the sentencing, but Robert did. He told me Patricia had sobbed throughout the proceeding and insisted she had done nothing wrong, that this was all a misunderstanding and persecution. The judge apparently wasn't sympathetic, noting that insurance fraud drove up costs for everyone, and that people in positions of community trust had a higher obligation to be honest. Meanwhile, the civil lawsuit that Jennifer had filed on behalf of our class action group was settled out of court. The HOA's insurance company agreed to pay $25,000 to be split among the 15 plaintiffs who had been issued improper fines, which worked out to about $1,600 each after legal fees. More importantly, the settlement included an agreement that the old board members would never serve in any leadership position in our HOA again. Life in Sagebrush Hills slowly returned to normal. The new board focused on actual community improvement rather than harassment. We repaved some streets, upgraded the pool facilities, and organized neighborhood events that people actually wanted to attend. The constant stream of angry emails and petty fines stopped, and people seemed genuinely happier. My car remained perfectly fine, the repairs holding up well. I even managed to become friends with several neighbors through all the drama, including Robert, who turned into something of a mentor figure. He had been through multiple HOA regimes over his 2 decades in the neighborhood, and had plenty of wisdom about how to keep things running smoothly, without turning into power-hungry tyrants. About a year after the initial accident, I was sitting on my front porch on a Saturday morning, drinking coffee and reading the news on my tablet, when I noticed someone walking down the street. It took me a moment to recognize Patricia. She looked older and tired, wearing sweatpants and a faded shirt, pushing a shopping cart full of what appeared to be cleaning supplies. She was apparently doing her community service hours by cleaning up the neighborhood park. Our eyes met for a brief moment as she passed my house. I didn't say anything, and neither did she. She just kept walking, pushing her cart toward the park at the end of the street. I felt a strange mix of emotions watching her go. Part of me felt vindicated that she had finally faced consequences for her actions. Part of me almost felt sorry for her, seeing how far she had fallen from her position of power and respectability. But mostly, I just felt relieved that the whole nightmare was finally over. Robert walked over from his house, following my gaze down the street. "Saw her doing her hours yesterday too," he said, settling into the chair next to me. "Apparently, she has to complete 20 hours a month until she hits 200. Judge wanted to make sure she actually did the work rather than trying to rush through it." "Think she learned anything from all this?" I asked. Robert snorted. "People like Patricia rarely learn anything except how to be more careful next time. But at least she can't hurt anyone in this neighborhood anymore, and that's what really matters." He was right. The new board had been functioning smoothly for over a year now. We had our challenges and disagreements, but they were normal community issues like budget allocation and landscaping choices, not battles over petty tyranny and corruption. My second year on the board involved more mundane matters. We negotiated a new contract with the landscaping company that saved the HOA 15% on monthly costs. We organized a successful community garage sale that raised money for playground equipment. We updated the pool rules to allow families to have birthday parties with advance reservation, something the old board had strictly forbidden. At one meeting, someone proposed implementing a rule requiring all cars parked on the street overnight to have current registration tags visible. It was actually a reasonable suggestion, aimed at preventing abandoned vehicles from sitting in the neighborhood. But before we voted on it, I insisted we first survey the homeowners to see if they supported the idea and discuss any concerns they might have. The survey revealed that while most people agreed with the concept, there were legitimate concerns about enforcement and privacy. We ended up modifying the proposal to only apply to vehicles that had been parked in the same spot for more than 72 hours, and we built in an appeals process for people with legitimate reasons for long-term street parking. When we finally implemented the rule 6 months later, after multiple rounds of input and revision, nobody complained because they had all been part of the process. That, I realized, was the fundamental difference between our board and the old one. We saw the homeowners as partners in maintaining the community, not as subjects to be ruled over. We asked for input instead of dictating terms. We explained our reasoning instead of hiding behind bureaucratic language. And we admitted when we made mistakes instead of doubling down on bad decisions. During my second year on the board, I started dating a woman named Penny Everett who had moved into the neighborhood a few months after all the drama with Patricia had concluded. She had heard stories about the HOA wars from neighbors, but found the whole thing hard to believe until I showed her my extensive documentation. We bonded over our shared experiences with difficult people and our appreciation for boring, functional local government. Penny worked as a teacher at a nearby elementary school and had the patience of a saint, which came in handy during occasional HOA disputes. When two neighbors got into a heated argument about a property line fence at one of our meetings, she calmly suggested they hire a surveyor together to settle the matter definitively, rather than continuing to argue based on assumptions. The neighbors agreed, the survey was done, and the dispute was resolved with minimal drama. "You're good at this," I told her afterward. "Ever consider running for the board?" "Absolutely not," she laughed. "I get enough politics dealing with the school administration. But I'm happy to provide consultation services as needed." By the time my 2-year term on the board was coming to an end, I had to decide whether to run for re-election. Part of me was tired of the responsibility and wanted to step back. But another part of me felt obligated to continue the work we had started, to make sure the neighborhood didn't slip back into the dysfunction of the old regime. Robert announced he wouldn't be running again. 2 years was enough for me, he said. I'm 78 years old. I want to spend my time gardening and spoiling my grandkids, not arguing about pool maintenance contracts. I understood completely. In the end, I decided to run for one more term, but only if we could recruit some new people to join the board. We needed fresh perspectives and energy, not just the same faces recycling through positions. We held a community forum to encourage people to run, and I was pleasantly surprised by the turnout. 8 people expressed interest in board positions, including Penny, who had apparently changed her mind after seeing how smoothly things had been running. The election was competitive, but friendly. I won re-election as vice president. Penny won a seat as treasurer, and 3 new homeowners joined the board, bringing different professional backgrounds and ideas. The new president was a retired military officer named Thomas Reed, who believed in structure and accountability, but also in treating people fairly. During my 3rd year on the board, we tackled some bigger projects. We negotiated with the town of Gilbert to get better street lighting installed throughout the neighborhood, improving safety without increasing HOA fees. We established a community garden in an unused corner of common property, which became incredibly popular. And we created a welcome committee to greet new homeowners and help them understand how the HOA worked, hopefully preventing future conflicts born from misunderstanding. One afternoon in late spring, I was working in my garage when I heard a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was surprised to see Deborah Carlson, the former HOA president, standing on my doorstep. She looked uncomfortable and wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "I know you probably don't want to talk to me," she started, "but I wanted to apologize." I was so surprised I didn't know what to say at first. Apologize for everything that happened. The way we ran the board, the way we treated homeowners, the way we specifically targeted you after Patricia's accident. It was wrong. She took a deep breath. "I've been doing a lot of thinking over the past 2 years, watching how you and the new board have been running things, seeing how much happier everyone is. I realized that we had become exactly the kind of petty tyrants that I used to complain about when I first moved here." "That's quite an admission," I said carefully. "Patricia and I were friends," Deborah continued. "When she got on the board, she convinced me to run too. She had all these ideas about maintaining standards and property values, and it sounded good at the time. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about the community and started being about control, about winning arguments and punishing people who disagreed with us. Why are you telling me this now? Because I'm selling my house and moving," she said. "My husband got transferred to Texas. And before I left, I wanted to at least try to make amends for the damage I caused. I know an apology doesn't fix what we did, but it's all I have to offer." I studied her face, trying to determine if she was sincere. She seemed genuinely remorseful, but 2 years of dealing with HOA politics had made me skeptical of everyone's motives. "I appreciate you coming by," I said finally. "I won't pretend that what you guys did was okay, because it wasn't. You made a lot of people miserable, including me. But I also understand that people can get caught up in group dynamics and lose perspective. So, for whatever it's worth, I accept your apology." She looked relieved and surprised. "Thank you. That's more than I probably deserve." She turned to leave, then paused. "You've done a good job with the board. The neighborhood is better now than it's been in years. I hope you keep it up." After she left, I stood in my doorway for a while, processing the unexpected conversation. It didn't change anything that had happened, but there was something cathartic about hearing someone from the old regime admit they had been wrong. I told Robert about it later, and he just shook his head. Deborah was always the follower in that group. Patricia was the real problem. Deborah just went along with it because she thought that's what you were supposed to do on an HOA board. Doesn't excuse her behavior, but at least she came to her senses eventually. Think Patricia will ever apologize? Not a chance. People like her never think they're wrong. It's always someone else's fault. As my third year on the board wound down, I decided it would be my last term. Penny and I had gotten engaged, and we were talking about starting a family soon. I wanted to focus on my personal life rather than community politics. The board was in good hands with Thomas and the other members, and there were several newer homeowners expressing interest in getting involved. At my final board meeting in December, the community presented me with a plaque thanking me for my service. It was a nice gesture, though the real reward was simply living in a functional neighborhood where people weren't constantly stressed about arbitrary fines and harassment. Robert had moved into an assisted living facility that fall, his health declining to the point where maintaining his house was too much work. Before he left, he threw a big barbecue party and invited the whole neighborhood. Nearly 100 people showed up to say goodbye and thank him for his decades of dedication to the community. "You know what I'm most proud of?" he asked me at the party, his hand shaking slightly as he held his drink. Not the successful fight against the old board, though that was satisfying. "I'm most proud that we proved it's possible to have an HOA that actually serves the people instead of tyrannizing them. That's the real victory." He was absolutely right. The following year, Penny and I got married in a small ceremony at the community center, with half the neighborhood in attendance. We bought a bigger house on the other side of Gilbert to make room for the family we were planning, but we stayed in touch with our friends from Sagebrush Hills. The neighborhood continued to thrive under the new board. Property values actually increased, not because of strict enforcement of petty rules, but because people genuinely wanted to live in a community that was well-maintained and friendly. The horror stories about the old board became neighborhood legend, told to new homeowners as a cautionary tale about what happens when people abuse positions of power. I drove through the old neighborhood one last time before we moved, taking in the familiar streets and houses. My old house looked good, with the new owners keeping up the landscaping. The community center had been repainted. The pool area had new umbrellas and furniture. Everything looked peaceful and well cared for. At the corner of Sagaro Drive, I paused at the spot where Patricia had crashed into my car all those years ago. The street showed no evidence of the accident that had set off such a chain of events. It was just a quiet residential corner, exactly as it should be. Sometimes I wondered what had happened to Patricia after her probation ended. I had heard through the neighborhood gossip network that she had moved out of state, possibly to avoid the stigma of the conviction. Deborah had indeed moved to Texas, as she said she would. Gerald, the treasurer, had simply faded into obscurity, keeping his head down and avoiding any community involvement. The whole experience had taught me several important lessons. First, that small amounts of unchecked power can corrupt people who might otherwise be reasonable. Second, that communities function best when everyone has a voice and decisions are made transparently. Third, that standing up to bullies is exhausting and expensive but ultimately necessary. And finally, that most people just want to live their lives in peace without being harassed over the length of their grass or the color of their curtains. Years later, when Penny and I had our first child, a son we named Marcus, I would sometimes tell him simplified versions of the HOA saga as bedtime stories. I framed them as tales about standing up for what's right and working together to solve problems, leaving out the more complex legal and financial details. "Did the mean lady ever say she was sorry?" Marcus asked one night when he was about 5 years old. "One of them did," I told him. "The other one probably still thinks she didn't do anything wrong." "That's sad," he said with the simple wisdom of children. "It is sad," I agreed. "But the important thing is that the community came together and fixed the problem. That's what people can do when they work as a team." Looking back on the entire experience from the comfortable distance of several years and a different house, I could see how the situation with Patricia and the accident had been a catalyst for change that was probably inevitable anyway. The old board had been overreaching and abusive for years, with Robert and others complaining about their behavior long before I moved in. But it took a dramatic incident like Patricia crashing into my car and then trying to fine me for it to finally galvanize enough homeowners into action. If Patricia had just admitted fault, apologized, and let her insurance handle the accident like a normal person, she probably would have remained on the board for years, continuing to make people miserable with petty fines and arbitrary rules. Instead, her vindictive overreach had exposed the rot at the heart of the HOA leadership and led to the downfall of the entire corrupt regime. There was a certain poetic justice in that. The last I heard about Sagebrush Hills, the neighborhood was thriving. The HOA had become a model for other communities in Gilbert, with board members from other neighborhoods coming to observe their meetings and learn about their transparent processes and homeowner-friendly approach. The community had won an award from the town for their successful beautification projects and active community engagement. Sometimes I missed being part of that community, part of something larger than myself. But mostly I was just grateful that the drama was behind me, that I could park my car wherever I wanted within reason, and that nobody was going to fine me for having the wrong color curtains or leaving my trash cans out too long. My Honda Accord, fully repaired from Patricia's collision, served me well for several more years before I finally traded it in for a larger SUV when our second child was born. The day I sold it, I took a moment to appreciate that battered and repaired rear quarter panel one last time. That damage, and the incident that caused it, had changed my life in unexpected ways, forcing me to get involved in my community and stand up to injustice when it would have been easier to just pay the fine and keep my head down. In the end, the story of HOA Karen who crashed into my car and then tried to claim I was at fault became more than just a frustrating experience or a legal battle. It became a lesson about the importance of accountability, the danger of unchecked authority, and the power of ordinary people to create change when they work together. It reminded me that doing the right thing is often difficult and expensive, but usually worth it in the long run. And it gave me one hell of a story to tell at parties, complete with police reports, court documents, and a dramatic recall election. Not everyone could say their mundane Tuesday morning bowl of cereal had been interrupted by a car crash that eventually led to criminal charges, a neighborhood revolution, and lasting reforms to local governance. As I pulled out of Sagebrush Hills that final time, heading to our new home and new chapter of life, I felt a sense of closure. The neighborhood was in good hands. The tyrants had been defeated. Justice, imperfect and delayed as it was, had eventually prevailed. And I had learned that sometimes the most important battles are fought not on grand stages, but in community center meetings and parking lot conversations. One reasonable decision and one fair rule at a time.